dealing with here in modern society, many of which you all have presented and talked about today. So the legal doctrine is under an incredible amount of pressure to evolve and to change. The other thing that's happening is that in the Eastern United States, the water law doctrine is called the riparian doctrine, which is based on the concept of reasonable use. Now in the West, the results of the prior appropriation system lead to harsh results, right? The first user gets to take 100% of her water right, and then if there's anything left, the next person gets to take something, and that might be 0. In contrast, in the East United States, under the reasonable use doctrine, everybody shares the pain under this concept of reasonableness. But that doctrine is also breaking down because this reasonableness concept is not well adapted to scarcity. And in many areas of the East, water scarcity is now becoming a reality. And what many national observers will tell you is that the Eastern system of riparianism and the Western system of prior appropriation are slowly doing this. And so the other trend that I would point out in Washington State is that power, if you will, is devolving. It's been decentralizing. The Department of Ecology has had its budget cut and its staff reduced every year since I've been working in this field. They've stopped doing more with less. They're now just doing less with less. And there have been a number of reforms over the years that have accelerated this trend. Okay, basin planning, right, is looking to the local people, local communities to drive solutions. We have county conservancy boards, which devolves power down to the local units, and many other similar steps. Now, all of this is complicated and adds to the uncertainty, but there's the flip side is that there's opportunity to create solutions and to drive the law. So my advice would be, don't try to fix the law. Don't worry about fixing water law. Focus on what you want to do. Focus on your solution. And then drag the regulatory agencies along with you. Secondly, when you run into a barrier in a regulation or a statute, seek a temporary limited exception. Don't go down to Olympia and ask them to change everything for the entire state or for the entire WIRA, because you'll run into the wall. Ask for a limited, small, non-threatening, temporary exception to do a specific project or a specific pilot program that is low expectations, low budget, low risk, and then do it. And then you'll build a track record, you'll work with other people, and you'll get some data. People in Olympia, legislators, they love nothing more than having a specific project that has worked somewhere, and then they're being asked to broaden that into a bigger program so that it can work other places. I would highly recommend that rather than trying to fix the law. A couple comments from the Yakima adjudication context. You know, the case was filed in 1977, and it is commonly the subject of derision and criticism, etc. But really, if you look across the West, it hasn't really taken an unusually long time. Water adjudications go on for decades. That's just what they are. And my advice, as other people have said, is to avoid that future if you can at all. It's extraordinarily costly. It's extraordinarily time-consuming. It's divisive. It distracts you from solutions. And the people who end up losing the most in an adjudication are the smaller folks who can't afford to hire a lawyer for 3 decades. The big folks who are moneyed will come out fine, as the person who quoted the familiar adage from Colorado is. My experience in the Yakima adjudication was that I was representing the city of Yakima in the mid-90s, and after 20 years of adjudication, the parties were ready to actually do some serious mediation. It took that long for a lot of the posturing to be stripped away, a lot of the rote positions that people always lead with, for people to really focus on what are their core interests, to understand the strengths and the weaknesses and the risks of their positions, and to give some stuff up and actually talk turkey about what mattered. And I guess I would say that if you all are going to really seriously start negotiating, You can go through the 5, 10, 15 years of the posturing, or you can try to figure out how to cut through that. And so my suggestion would be, as you all are working with your lawyers, everybody has to confer with legal counsel to understand your own rights, what rights you have, what rights you don't have, and to understand what risks you have. You need to go through that analysis to understand what your particular situation is. But once you've done that, then my suggestion would be to ask your lawyers not to focus on litigation, because if litigation comes, then you can participate as you need to, but focus on what can you get done by agreement. The power to contract is the basis of Western civilization. It's the basis of Western law. And the power that you have as private parties is the power of contract. It is so flexible and so powerful that you can overcome a lot of the regulatory obstacles. And ask your lawyer to develop options. What can we do by agreement? How can we manipulate different property rights in order to come to agreement? Think outside the box in that way. A couple comments just on things that have come up. I really enjoyed the discussion about the concept of transferring development rights for water. I think that's a really interesting idea, very creative, and I would encourage folks to work on that. But already in just a couple presentations and comments that were come up, there's some confusion or maybe some different things that are being talked about, and I would encourage clarity about what is really, to keep the eye on the ball. And that are folks trying to trade development rights for water security, or is it to monetize potential land value? Because those two goals lead you in different directions with different models. So really focus on what's the goal, and then build a system around that. Maybe that you end up with 3 or 4 different systems to accomplish 3 or 4 different goals. But be specific about that and focus on the core interests. Another one is storage. And I'm going to come to this kind of backwards, and then I'll close here. One comment that I heard over and over again was concerns about lack of information about this or that, or inadequate information about certain subjects. That's always going to be the case. And in fact, it's going to be more so. The complexity is increasing. The amount of information that we have is increasing. Climate change is going to add an unbelievable amount of complexity to this. It's going to get worse, not better, folks. So don't defer action or decide not to work on something because the information isn't ready. Instead, come up with a working group or some system to identify what the information problems are, what the information needs are, and build that into your problem set and your solution set. Make that something that you're working on rather than a reason not to do something. Storage is one of those things that's really quite difficult to accomplish, but it is going to really be essential in the new era of climate change, where there's more of the precipitation that's going to be coming down as rain and not as snow. And there's not a good law on this. This is something that is going to be created at the local level. And I think this is another really creative opportunity for folks to look at. And with that, I will close.
Thank you so much.
Is this the upper one?
I think it is. That's why I pointed it out that way when I was up.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm like the last person on this sunny Friday afternoon on this last work day in May. I'm aware of these facts. But I want to draw 4 points, okay? And it's, again, I'm a lawyer, and it sounds like I'm the only lawyer happy to do water law in the whole room, maybe even in the whole state, maybe even in all of Western states. I think there's something to be said about the way prior appropriation doctrine works. And it feeds into one of my points, is that solutions are always full of consequences and effects. It's something that's inherent in any solution. If you're a parent, you understand this, mediating fights between your children. There's always a consequence and there's an effect to stopping some behavior. And that's what prior appropriation has built into it. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with there being consequences for actions and there being accountability for actions. And that's what the prior appropriation really establishes. And there's something, to be said. There's just a process where that happens. So that's one of my points, is that there are always challenges inherent in solution. And when we look at water, and we look at decision-making regarding water, and water rights, and access, and allocation, and our personal and social ethics and values regarding water, we're always going to be talking about consequences and effects. And we have to be responsible and recognize that that is inherent in the conversation. It would be intellectually dishonest to figure there will be a change in a shared resource that does not affect everyone. So that has to be clearly maintained. The other point that I like to just let everyone remember is that facts are important. And there are, clinically speaking, two types of facts. There are legal facts, and then there are actual factual realities. Like, I can see 3 trees outside the window. That is a fact. I see that. That is part of the reality. A legal reality is that I am a Lummi tribal member. That is because of a relationship that I have with the tribal government. So when we talk about water law and we talk about consequences and effects, we're also going to be having to have very clear and frank discussions about facts. Factual reality is there are some people in our water basin who do not follow water law. So there we have a legal and a factual reality. And we're going to have to deal with that, and we're going to have to look at that with eyes wide open and recognize there will be consequences to remedying these situations. And then also, the other point that I like to draw is that focusing on solutions is not inherently hostile. It is not hostile or degrading or demeaning to accept responsibility or to expect responsibility from governments and from individual citizens. And that's something that Lummi believes very strongly about. Having accountability and respecting one another's time and efforts is not hostile. It's what, we believe is good government and stewardship and neighbors. If your neighbor, if you lived in the middle of a development and a neighbor on one side was creeping around your backyard to take from a neighbor on the other side, how long would you avoid eye contact with that person who's being exploited? How long would you feel good about that? Or would you look for the solution and recognize that maybe looking for that solution is going to put you on the outs with that neighbor who's making the poor choices for a little while, but in the end, the whole block is going to benefit. So looking at solutions like that is not looking for hostility, it's not looking to pick fights, it's really looking for the long-term stewardship interests for everyone involved. And the fourth point that I want to make, because there have been some vague assumptions and statements made by folks who, honestly, I will say, have not been in the room, have not been on the email list, have not been part of the groups, kind of alleging that time and effort hasn't been put in to agreeing to a solution right now in our community. And we have spent a lot of time trying to agree. But all those folks who are sitting in a room trying to agree, we're government employees, paid by someone's tax base. And at a certain point, sitting in a room every Thursday afternoon, every Wednesday afternoon, it starts to be a waste of your money. So we have to realize that as governments, sometimes after 12 years of meeting every Wednesday, after 7 years of having 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. technical meetings with 5 different representatives from 5 different governments, and we're all responsible for other things in our government, those meetings might be the waste of time. Those meetings might be the waste of money, and we then have to look at other solutions to reach those binding, formulaic agreements where we have accountability, responsibility, and in the end, cooperation and a plan we can all live with. So I guess just kind of at the end of the day, we're looking for solutions, but to have a decent solution that sticks, you have to have clear roles, responsibilities, and expectations of everyone so that you can walk away from the table with your to-do list and you can see your counterpart's task list and you can know how to hold one another accountable. So you can call up and say, hey, when we negotiated that term, I thought we were going to implement it one way or the other. And then you can resolve it that afternoon without having 12 weeks of protracted meetings and schedules to wrangle and things like that. So, I guess just kind of to wrap up, I know that LUMI is focused on solutions and is focused really on finality and has tried for over a decade to contract that. Now, there are legal and factual challenges to doing that I can't get into, but the effort has been made by a lot of folks in this room, a lot of agencies, and a lot of concerned citizens who have really been engaged. And the fact that LUMI now wants to find certainty through the initiation of a lawsuit against the Department of Ecology should not be viewed as an open act of hostility. It's one that's looking for solutions because we've tried everything else.
All right, so it is a sunny afternoon, and I guess what I would like to do is ask any of you if you have any additional, very brief closing comments. I'm seeing some shaking heads. No, I appreciate that. Everybody else is saying no. All right, so do we have time for a couple of questions?
Thank you. This is for Ann. Ann, you talked about wanting to see some alternative development patterns. Can you give us some fairly specific ideas of what you mean?
I know that a lot of the traditional ways we go about developing land involve a fair amount of impervious surface and removing a lot of native vegetative cover, and that as much as you can minimize both of those things, you do a lot to benefit flow. There's also things that you can do to surface water runoff that comes from all that impervious surface, and the more you can put that back in the ground, it helps to benefit flow. There's all kinds of real clear information about how changes in land cover affect surface water hydrology, and I think that we should be bringing those suites of actions into the bigger picture in terms of what we do to protect water resources.
Question for both. Question for Michael and Adam with respect to your points about don't let the law get in the way. We heard earlier from Mr. Lindsay that a closed basin means, trying to augment stream flow with groundwater has been blocked. Do either of you have any suggestions about how to work around that?
I do. Go ahead. Okay, that's an answer.
The lawyers are going to defer to the 27-year-old engineer.
Thanks. I'm just a young whippersnapper. I'm just a young whippersnapper, Skip. But no, one of the things that I had on my list of potential things to look at, not necessarily solutions, but things to look at, is the idea of, and it gets at Adam's point of doing small things and doing it, and that is try to build some support for approaching ecology to relax some of those restrictions in 173.501. One of the reasons for the year-round closures as opposed to seasonal closures was an administrative decision that there wasn't staff for enforcement, there wasn't staff or funding to have a water master in the basin, so you couldn't enforce it. It's easier to have a closure so you know if there's a use during that period of time, you know that's a violation, as opposed to is it March 30th or March 29th, that kind of thing. So I think there's a possibility of getting those relaxed. So that opens the door for at least evaluating some more creative management strategies, moving water around and doing some different things. I would add, though, that if you do that, you also then need to have the enforcement capability to provide the certainty that people are not going to be cheating and using water during the actual closed period. So what I would propose that it get looked at is, and this is going to be probably fairly incendiary maybe, but anyway, look at relaxing 173, 501. I'd probably do it in a defined basin or sub-basin anyway. Adding some enforcement capability, possibly through tax a surcharge on property tax to pay for a water master, so ecology's budget isn't subject to enforcement, because those positions come and go all the time with changes in budget. So you lose that enforcement capability, and there's a lot of interest in the room that want to see the enforcement if you're going to have this flexibility. So I would say look at the idea of relaxing some of those restrictions, amping up the ability to regulate and get compliance with water rights. I would suggest providing some grace period for people to do what I suggested, get your water rights in order, get change applications in, hopefully get them processed, but it shouldn't be forever. It should be a defined period of time. I think we should look at, and to some extent I think this has been done, you should look at where are the fisheries issues flow related and where are they more habitat related, and see if you can work some deals where you improve the habitat and don't worry so much about flow in certain locations. The culvert case was recently heard. I understand it's now been appealed by the state, but the culvert case clearly indicates the importance of removing fish passage culverts that are a blockage. I think the group could look at doing that and see about the possibility of trades for water rights or some kind of credit towards water rights, and then the reducing impervious surfaces wherever you can to help with the recharge of the aquifers. I mean, those are all site-specific sorts of things that might work, but that's some of the ideas I've had about ways of trying to move ahead, at least in some areas, and see if it works.
My question is actually a broader question to the panel and to the public. Please give us a finger wiggle if you agree with this philosophical statement, which was the historical statement of the Hawaiian people before the Caucasians came aboard. The life of the land is perpetuated by living right by it.
That's not the
Sure.
way it goes.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, here we go. Yesterday, Randy gave us some rather moving words that were pretty powerful. And he talked about the 7 generations. And given the fact that we're moving into a period of time where there are some changes coming, climate change, and the fact that we're going to add several, I can't remember what the projection was for the number of people that we expect to move into the county over the next 50 years. I'd like some of you, if you could, do a little thought experiment and put ourselves at least maybe 2 or 3 generations out and tell me what you think about, or tell us what you think about what the water situation might look like here in 50, 75 years, maybe 100 years.
I haven't given that a great deal of thought, obviously, until now, and so, but I guess I would hope that we're using water a lot more efficiently, so that we have, whatever the current state-of-the-art technology may be, because hopefully that's going to improve as well. I would hope that we have a better understanding of how our lifestyle choices and land use choices affect water, so that we've improved things like the impervious surfaces and those sorts of things. Beyond that, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know what it would be. I would hope that they look back at this group of people and say, man, they really fixed some of this for us. So, you know, that may be a little optimistic, but that's what I would hope.
I don't think it'd be drinking out of Lake Whatcom. You'll be drinking from a direct line from the wastewater treatment facility, and it'll be brought right back into the system. The technology is there, that it's already there. It's just a matter of time. I would say that that's clear in my mind. Lake Whatcom, I'm not saying it was going to deteriorate. I'm going to say it's going to make more sense, and people's minds will be adapted to the fact that waters run through every body and every critter on Earth. It continues to do that no matter where you get it from. And with the technology for treatment, it's going to be straight lined very soon. They're already doing it in Florida, or coming close in California.
It's a good one, I like that.
Yeah, actually the Tulalip are real leaders in that field, and they've got a plant, and there's a lot to learn there.
In terms of climate change, that was one of the areas we were getting poked very hard in our temperature credit, because they were saying, are you planting the right species, Bruce? You know, for 50 years from now. And I said, I don't know, but my way of dealing with it.
You're supposed to talk into the mic.
I'm sorry. You always tell me to shut up, Sue. Come on. But the way we're dealing with that issue is to greatly increase the diversity. We were planting about 35 different varieties of native plants. We've almost doubled that to deal with, are we creating a suite of very diverse, both trees as well as shrubs and the shady species, that it'll allow for some of those to probably die out over time. So the diversity is still one for me, that I'm, at least in the shade credit, confident that we've got enough diversity there that we should be pretty good for a while.
I think you might also see every community or every neighborhood having micro water storage facilities or aquifer recharge facilities in order to capture the winter rainfall and to keep that water for agricultural use, and also for release in the late summer in order to support stream flows. We might also have, this doesn't work everywhere, and it might presumably work somewhere in the county. There also is going to be increased understanding of how to store water, what's called ASR, underground water storage, to take some of the excess precipitation during the winter, pump it underground, and then understand where it goes throughout the groundwater system, so that that winter flood is not completely lost, if you will, but is used to both support out-of-stream use and in-stream use during times of scarcity in the summer.
I think echoing what the other folks have said here, the reality is we're going to be really tightly managing systems, even more, way more than we are now, way more probably than even the more heavily managed systems like down in California are. And what they're going to be doing, I can't even imagine. But we're going to be looking at where every drop of water is, so there's going to be a lot more measuring, a lot more sort of paying close attention to what's going on in storage. But I also think we're going to be seeing much bigger floods. And so what we have in the floodplain now, it's not likely to be there in the future. And so I think we're going to be looking at real major changes and shifts in how what is developed land and what kinds of things go on the surface of the land. I don't think we're going to be living as close to the water as we do now. Everything's going to be shifting back and moving away. And I think the hard reality, and I'm not certainly not practicing as a biologist, even though that's what I studied, is a lot of the organisms that we're familiar with now, I don't know if they're going to be able to survive and to function. I mean, there's going to be population shifts all over the place, and we're going to be looking at very different systems.
I just have one thing this was based on Randy's comment, right? So I'll use one of Randy's lines. Lemmy doesn't want museum fisheries. We want fish that we can go out and harvest and share with our community. Last week, we had the first salmon ceremony, and I know invitations were extended to the community, and a lot of people came out. And that's not just bells and whistles, that's real lummy when we do that. And that's the expectation that in 50 years, we'll still be hosting those events for the community, and we'll still be providing sustainable and, subsistence and commercial harvests for our community.
You're next.
I had a question. Could I just add quickly? That is mutual cultural education.
I think adaptive management will be very, very important, and we got to do it, because you look at, we're basing all these models and hydrographs of stuff in the past, and what we do know is that everything in the future is going to be different. So, we're trying to come up with standards and everything that are using data from decades when we know those hydrographs are going to change dramatically will require us to have a much more flexible adaptive management approach.
I had a question for the two attorneys, and looking at, our legal system is actually fairly dynamic and changing over time, and one of you had mentioned the merging between the riparian zone kind of attitude towards water management and the prior appropriation we've had in the West, and I had some thoughts in regard to some things Michael and Miranda had talked about, the difficulties with litigation and not knowing the directions the federal government would go. And I'm more familiar with Colorado law and the Colorado Compact, which certainly had huge deficiencies even for its time in 1922, and the changes that we now have in knowledge of the science of water and riparian zones and so on. But also last year was the very first year that compact renegotiations included Mexico. And that's because there was a huge deficit in American thought, United States thought processes regarding the nation next door. And I think that we need to give some serious thought as to trends in legal matters, and if we do want to avoid litigation, we need to be understanding that what those trends are, and be more open to the idea of finding solutions that work for everyone. But specifically recognizing that we have not recognized what we didn't obviously recognize at the time of Wounded Knee.
I didn't hear a question, so go on.
Chuck, you're up.
I have a question. Hopefully 50 years from now, where your vision takes us. What happens if Z equals 0? Remember the pie that Jeremy showed us?
Well, if we get to a point where we're all fighting about nothing, then we've waited too long to have a solution-oriented conversation. Because right now that's not the facts. Right now we have something that we can address. But if we choose not to address it, we choose not to have accountability, responsibility, and stewardship, then we will get to a point where we're fighting over nothing. And that's going to be the biggest waste of government resources that we could ever see. So we're not there. That's not the way I think about things. I know that's the way Lummi doesn't think about things. We're not sitting and waiting for the problems to get worse. So I understand that sounds like an evasive non-answer, but we're not looking at those facts yet.
All right, I see that stimulated a couple of other questions, so here we go.
Thank you. Okay, Anne, I recall that you said in 50 years we'll probably require more enforcement. I'm wondering where the financial support for that enforcement will come from. I realize today there is a financial shortfall resulting in lack of enforcement on the part of DOE. And please don't take this personally, because it's not aimed at you personally, but sitting here as a taxpayer, I feel really disappointed by the lack of enforcement on the part of the agency I thought was taking care of all these things. I know for a fact that there are water rights certificates in existence where water has been designated in excess acreage feet and nobody comes around to see if water is being put to beneficial use or not. Nobody's fine-tuning the certificate to say, hey, there's water here that could go back into the public's resource and possibly be reallocated to someone in need, perhaps a farmer. What can you tell me about that, if anything?
Well, I think I heard sort of two parts to your question. One is, what we've got problems with enforcement now, and that's not, that you're asking, what are we doing about that? And you're right, it is a huge struggle for us and has been for many years. I think Jim's suggestion that if you really want active enforcement in a particular area, we're going to find ways to help the state pay for that. And, Jim came up with one suggestion, but continually relying on a general fund budget that's always being cut leads to a situation where what we do is we respond to complaints, and we do the best we can with that, and that's all we can say. But in terms of looking ahead to a more heavily managed water supply and water use system, it will probably depend on public values and what the public wants to spend money on and feels that they can spend money on, and there's always going to be the same long list of very diverse public needs, and we'll be making hard choices about where to spend money in the future, just like we are now.
And I guess I would just add that, having been there for a long time and seen when ecology did try to do water rights enforcement in places, what we usually saw was not people saying, oh, thank you. It was generally people calling their legislator and say, cut the budget. And as you go through budget reduction periods, I supervised a staff of about 17 people who wrote water right permits for a while, and at Northwest Regional Office for a while, and it's I think 4 now or something like that. But anyway, but when you had a budget cut, two things. If I had a permit writer who wrote a permit and was going to then write the next permit, but that first one got appealed, you can take the next one off their desk, because they're going to spend the next 2 or 3 months in the appeal process defending the decision that they just made. So that next one's not going to get processed, and the backlog goes up. And that was just a never-ending story. The other thing that happens is when you have enforcement people, they go out and find violations, they issue enforcement orders, those get appealed, they're tied up in that, and then you've got attorney generals get involved, and so for every enforcement position you've got a whole bunch of workload, more than one person's worth of workload tied with that. When budget cut times come around, it's really attractive to cut the enforcement person because of that magnified effect. And so a combination of factors over the years, but I just got to say, you're one of the few people that I've heard say we'd like to see more water rights enforcement, and I've heard a couple of people this week and last couple of days talk about it, but trust me, it's in a much different context than usual, because usually it is, why are you doing this? Leave us alone. Don't do that, etc. Other states have done it, have a long history of it, and in fact, one of the states, was it Wyoming, Jeremy? Anyway, one of the guys came and talked to us, and they said that what they did is, if Bruce and I are farmers or water users of any type, and Bruce thinks I'm doing something wrong, and he calls the enforcement agency, it's understood that the enforcement person goes to him first and makes sure his water right use is in order, and then they come to me. And so it becomes largely self-policing, but we just don't have that kind of a history of enforcement in this state.
Well, on that point, I'd just like to ask, why water is owned by the people of the state of Washington? Why is it socially acceptable to steal from the people of the state of Washington? Why is there no accountability for that?
That's a good question.
We as a society have determined that it's not acceptable to consume alcohol and drive because you are a hazard to people on the roadways of the state. Yet we think it's socially permissible to steal water, which belongs to everyone. And that is what happens if you do not have a water right and you are using a water right, you are stealing water from all the people in the state of Washington. So how is that okay? And why are we not thinking about that in those terms? It's in the state constitution. It belongs to the people of the state. So, whether ecology enforces or not, there's also a lack of citizenship engagement on this. I mean, we can get all excited about whether some permit gets issued for an industrial development out there, But that's within their rights. We have lots of people acting outside of any rights they have, and we have no one saying anything about it. And then we have Lummi, who has a right, just wants it recognized and enforced. And we've got all sorts of conspiracy theories, the sky is falling and everything like that. But we have this social misconception about the way common resources function and the way they affect everyone. And we cannot have this, this incongruent viewpoint and expect to reach a solution. And this is where I get back to this concept about accountability and responsibility.
Hello, here we go. This one's for Diana, and you know, I'm getting old, and I'm hoping that we can get somewhere before I'm gone, and any progress towards accomplishing something is almost welcome at this point. And so anyway, my question is, have you heard anything from the Department of Interior indicating that they might be willing to look at your request, or any kind of indication of when that might happen in the future?
Thanks, Doug. Are you thinking of retirement to take your band on tour and things?
No, I'm just trying.
Sounds like a better alternative than our conference room meetings. So with respect to we talked about it yesterday, to the request for federal litigation, the United States and Lummi Nation versus the state of Washington. And Nooksack Tribe also filed a similar request. The Lummi sent theirs in 2011, June 2011, so we're approaching the 2-year mark from when I dropped that in the email box. So what we're hearing is there is a federal litigation team focused on this. There is a litigation team that has been appointed to the request, and we have started the process to review technical data and to outline legal arguments. There is a procedural process that the federal government likes to undertake, which is to provide 60-day notice to the governor of the state prior to the United States initiating a lawsuit against a state. And that's for any instance where the United States is suing a state. Could be for a voting rights thing, a natural resources thing, an Indian thing, civil rights thing. So that 60-day letter to Governor Inslee has not yet been sent. I would imagine that at the point that letter gets sent, it would become a public record, and then you'll kind of know that more stuff is happening. That's the best, most clear, cryptic answer I can provide this afternoon.
And I think I'm going to call it. It is a sunny afternoon, and we have run out of time. I thank Diana, Adam, and Jim, Bruce, and Michael for being so open and sharing some of your deepest thoughts about all of this with us. I really thank the audience, and actually now I'm getting into Sue's.
I'm supposed to be the thanker.
Yeah, you're supposed to be the thanker. Here you go.
Thank you. Yes, I am now the last thing that stands in your way between the sun. And I'm going to be very brief, and my message really is, I want to thank all of you in the audience for attending this event. We can't solve these problems without having you here interacting with the people that are in front of us today and yesterday. And so I want to just make sure you understand how critical your role is in this solution process, and I hope that many of you will remain engaged past this 2-day symposium. And I want to reiterate how important it's been to have all of the panels and participants in this process engaged. I have personally learned a lot, and I've been doing water resource work way too long, 25 years. I confessed that yesterday, and but I really appreciate the perspectives that many people have brought to the table. And my last thank yous, I have 3 more thank yous. One is I want to thank the county and the executive. Welcome back, Jack, for your support for this event. And this would not have been possible without funding from the YR1 Joint Board. Thank you to them. And I want to finish this with a special thank you to the members, again, of the planning team that helped put this event together. And if they would please stand up one more time so that you can get a chance to thank them for this, because they spent a lot of time working on it. Come on, Becky. And I do have to finish this with, Claire filled this out, so you're now released. And thank you very much for coming.